History is full of empires that rose and fell. Indeed, you can go outside right now and see a distinct lack of empires from Mongol to Mali holding political power. Empires falling apart seem as inevitable as their rise, which, while not implicitly true, there is no fifth law of the universe that dictates that empires must collapse. Well, betting that some empire will collapse eventually is probably as close to a sure deal as you can get. The problem, of course, is that within video games, once you're established, once you're strong, and once all your threats are dealt with, you don't tend to collapse. In fact, rarely do you see people continuing to play campaigns after losing just one war, let alone after collapsing, because losing isn't fun. And this is something I want to establish before we begin in earnest. Adding more rebels, more arbitrary revolts, and more arbitrary difficulty doesn't address the problem, namely that losing isn't fun. So I guess the question also becomes, do you want losing to be fun? And I would argue that outside of maybe Hearts of Iron 4, where it's just one big war the game, within all Paradox titles, okay, relevant Paradox titles, obviously City Skylines, for example, is excluded, well, within all Paradox titles, we do have empires that both rise and fall during the perspective time period covered. It's also fundamentally a huge missed opportunity from an empire management point of view, as handling a collapse could be a rewarding principle in itself. Games such as Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion, okay, it's more of a scenario DLC, but you get the point, rightfully earned critical acclaim as specifically crafted scenarios where you're in charge of a large crumbling empire, and you do your best to try and hold the thing together. It is possible to create fun while losing, and to top all of that off, the extra challenge of managing a big empire being actually quite hard, not micro-intensive hard, but systematically hard, and overcoming that challenge can make victory all that much sweeter. That said, before we do begin in earnest, well, a like would be appreciated and a subscription would be amazing if you haven't already. 61k subs has recently been achieved, and with the Austrian force limit of 63,000 now well within sight, victory is now more possible than ever. So if you'd like to see me triumph over the starting force limit of Austria, your subscription would naturally be appreciated. Furthermore, if you're intending on playing EU5 day one and wish to pre-order the game, well, please consider using code Lemon Cake or the link below to get yourself a minus 0% discount cost modifier, albeit supporting the channel in the process. But enough self-shitting, let's begin with Imperator Rome. I know, a game frequently not covered here, and a game that usually shows up in these kinds of videos for me to either say, abandoned game, next, or to clarify that the system in Imperator is the same as the system in EU4, with some mild improvements. See the Imperator siege system being just the EU4 siege system with slightly positive tweaks. That all said, I think it's important to bring Imperator Rome up here because of all the Paradox games, I think here we see one of the best attempts at frankly relevant internal stability. Paradox games love to make your armies have 102% loyalty to the state with a 2% margin of error, of course, but within Imperator Rome you can actually have substantial revolts and civil wars with the generals going rogue and all that fun stuff. I do most certainly believe that if the game was given the attention it deserves, by later releases the Civil War internal stability issue could have been expanded up substantially, but in many ways Imperator exists, as always, as a game with incredible potential, but not even bad implementation, just frankly a lack of implementation. So that said, let's conclude Imperator Rome by saying that they set up some truly incredible baselines for this issue, and then left for non-Roman pastures, something they will also be doing as we set our sights towards Crusader Kings. The stability and internal politics of a country, for better or for worse, are significant aspects of the difficulties of a game. This is to say that difficulty within Crusader Kings 3 specifically is already quite a contentious topic. I do for what it's worth believe Crusader Kings 3 to be a significantly easier game than Crusader Kings 2, but the domain of difficulty as a concept within Crusader Kings is something that is best covered in a dedicated Crusader Kings 3 video. But today I want to talk Empire, about blobbing and keeping the blob together. And I want to say too that the inherent groundwork for this in the form of rebellious factions, scheming vassals, is all there. But one aspect I'll bring up Crusader Kings 2 for this comparison is that CK3 vassals don't really do anything. The perfect vassal in Crusader Kings 2 is one that sits on their land and maybe builds some buildings, maybe doesn't, but for all intents and purposes he just sits there, gives you levies and monies, doesn't expand, doesn't grow, doesn't threaten you, and just kind of, well again, sits there, right? That's CK3 vassals. That's all CK3 vassals. So I want to introduce, as a bit of a point of comparison, a scaling line between the content, normal, and ambitious traits, both present within Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3. In Crusader Kings 2, the content trait was amazing for vassals because it made them sit there and do nothing. So far, so good. Meanwhile, normal vassals would try and expand, either internally by conquering other vassals or externally. And finally, ambitious vassals would go ham. You'd think this would make the game easier. After all, if you're playing as Ireland and your vassal invades Scotland, surely that just makes you stronger. Well, it does make you stronger, but also this new vassal is now just significantly stronger as well, and is a destabilizing aspect for your realm. CK3 vassals, on the other hand, are incredibly passive regardless of their content, ambitious or normal, and for the most part basically sit on their land patiently waiting to pay you taxes. This does make the game easier, sure, but also in Crusader Kings 2, even the big boys like Byzantium or the Abbasids had ambitious vassals, and you could time your wars with a big revolt and actually find success while doing so, while Crusader Kings 3 realms are insanely stable. Another important metric to consider is that while indeed certain characters did build big empires, those empires were full of other vassals also constantly scheming and doing things, leading to instability, in a way that made the game more challenging either from a blobbing point of view or even an empire management point of view, but in truth in a way that made the game more fun. Now, if you want to play some tall SimCity campaign though, this ambitiousness was certainly annoying, don't get me wrong, but the irony of that statement was that of course keeping a big realm together was made more rewarding when you overcame those issues. And I also want to mention that all the expansions by vassals done in the Crusader Kings 2 section have historical precedence. Indeed, we don't even need to look far to find it. Normandy, for all practical purposes, broke free from French rule, by the Duke of Normandy expanding far enough and quick enough to take over England, becoming the King of England and hence breaking free from the King of France. Burgundy too ate French vassals and HRE vassals alike until it also became too big and hence functionally independent. And even under Norman rule, for example, King William the Conqueror technically wouldn't expand his realm into Ireland and Wales, not throughout his own campaigns, but through his nobles conquering land in their own names, while staying his subjects. This basically just doesn't happen in Crusader Kings 3, while happening rather frequently in Crusader Kings 2. Now, simply increasing AI aggressiveness both for vassals and national leaders, I believe, would make Crusader Kings 3 more challenging, as it would lead to more empires rising, sure, but also would make empires falling from internal revolts from within more of a thing. But we also have to acknowledge that such a change would make certain types of campaigns harder. For example, if you're playing as Brittany in Crusader Kings 3, you can pretty safely spend the entire campaign as Brittany, building buildings in Brittany, going to feasts, and basically never getting conquered by France. In Crusader Kings 2, you're getting conquered by France, then France is going to get conquered by the HRE or Spain, Spain of course being 2/3 of the time a Muslim, before this all ends in a glorious massive civil war after which the king of the mega blob dies and a random 10-year-old king takes over, leading to more civil wars and more content. I would consider this more fun, but this undoubtedly makes the game harder if your goal is just, I want to play SimCity in Brittany. Now, Crusader Kings 3 does have aggressiveness settings, namely of course the win button great conquerors get, that people love to complain about. But hear me out here, those people that are complaining about great conquerors kind of have a point. Because yes, these great conquerors are aggressive, or even more aggressive than Crusader Kings 2 ambitious characters, but they also get win buttons for wars, or at least what would be win button for wars if the CK3 men-at-arms system didn't for all intents and purposes trivialize warfare for the player. Okay, enough half spoilers for the difficulty in CK3 video. What does this mean for us in terms of the rise and fall of empires? Well, Crusader Kings 3 in my opinion has empires that grow very slowly, when they grow at all, and they do so in a very stable manner, rarely having internal issues. Even famously unstable institutions like the Holy Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire, aka the HRE or ERE, I guess the HRE is a Roman institution after all, they inherited the Roman desire for constant internal strife. Well, those jokes aside, those empires are far too stable compared to the Crusader Kings 2 and real-life counterparts, and frequently both collapse and expand less than they really should. This, in my opinion, greatly pains me, as Crusader Kings 3 takes place both from a historical point of view and a game design point of view. You know, you play as a person, not a country, and you deal with other people, aka individuals, not countries, in an environment where emergent gameplay around the rise and fall of empires is just so brimming with potential. And well, again, to reference the topic for a third time, due to the nature of difficulty of Crusader Kings 3, from a game design perspective, well, it just doesn't happen. Even here, I must confess that simply increasing the aggressiveness of the AI subjects would not resolve this issue. Mechanics such as the trivial access and availability of men-at-arms, absurd economic scaling, which doesn't require careful strategy or planning, it requires you to put the steward on grow development, and whoops, you've now trivialized money, all lead to the game becoming significantly easier and significantly more stable for both human and AI empires. You'd think I'm exaggerating here, by the way, regarding the development point, because I'm exaggerating, but only slightly. What I also think is important to mention, though, is that a lack of difficulty isn't an inherent flaw, it's a design choice. Let's be clear, Mario games aren't particularly difficult to finish on a casual playthrough, but it doesn't make the Mario games bad. Difficulty is a choice which has many impacts on the game as a whole. I like Crusader Kings 3, I speak favourably of the game as a whole, but within this domain, Crusader Kings 3 is a massive missed opportunity. Crusader Kings, most clearly, when considering Western Europe, which is fundamentally its core selling point, source check the name of the franchise, well, it's a society that is post-collapse of the Western Roman civilization, for lack of a better word. It's an environment where indeed you are rebuilding civilization itself with feudal principles, and for the full historical experience will be necessary for you to also suffer those societal collapses that are occurring during this period. Hopefully, just in Crusader Kings 3 after all, you wouldn't want to actually find yourself in a collapsing civilization, right? But what if you found yourself in such a predicament? Rebuilding civilization is certainly no trivial task, but while you may know conceptually about the printing press or gunpowder, do you know how to actually make them yourself? Well, if you don't, or that concept interests you, may I suggest to you today's sponsor, the book, How to Rebuild Civilization. Containing information on all the institutions and beyond, it delivers rare knowledge and inspires you into deeper thinking. And if you're a Paradox Excel spreadsheet enjoyer, which I know you are, you watched that loading screen tier list for crying out loud, well, this is the book for you. This is the perfect gift for your smart friends or yourself, containing stunning illustrations on high-quality paper that has you covered if you find yourself in need of a quick civilization restart. And if you want to dig deeper, there's even a hidden puzzle quest for that extra layer of intrigue for you to partake in. So head on down below to the description, or the pinned comment, and grab yourself the book. But with that tangent aside, we move on to EU4. We will mention EU5 in a bit, but within EU4, usually the factors that lead to your collapse tend to be external. Now, naturally, an aspect of this collapse is separatist rebels enforcing demands on your nation, hence leading to your demise, but within EU4, all internal troubles are actually triggered from external events. And what I mean by this is that the cause of most internal issues are basically either prolonged military conflicts that would give you war exhaustion and hence provide you with significant jumps in unrest, or recent conquests and expansions of territory that provide you with instability due to being overextended. Oh, and well, naturally, other countries can also cut you down to size and annex you. That, of course, is also an external threat to any empire. But in this rather ironic state, when you finish a world conquest, when every nation has been conquered by you and you've obtained a core in every province, aka stabilizing your realm, so you have an overextension, that is the peak stability of your empire. At that point, once separatism takes away and hence the only rebels you get are particularists and peasants, you can actually go ahead and delete all of your armies, navies, and forts. In fact, you can delete all of your military infrastructure because your country will no longer collapse. Now, you may be thinking, aha, silly lemon cake, you forgot about disasters. Well, firstly, they practically only ever spawn peasants or particularists, never really separatists, so in the worst cases, you'd have to decrease taxes, the horror. But may I remind you that once you've completed a world conquest and are stable, this means that all vanilla disasters are now preventable because you have a practically infinite amount of advent points that you're not spending on coring and hence can remain on 3 stability forever. 3 stability is naturally a very magical number that makes all of your disasters, with very few exceptions, go away. Is your country on fire due to court and country? Well, not really, you have 3 stability. Are the peasants rising up in the Peasants' War? No, not really, you have 3 stability. Do you have an unguarded nomadic frontier? Nah, your frontier is guarded, you see you actually have 3 stability defending the border. Bad jokes aside, the fall of a nation in EU4 fundamentally occurs from outside sources, and while in Crusader Kings the limitations of your personal domain forced you to have permanent vassals that could at least in theory scheme against you, in EU4 you're under no such obligation to have vassals, and the one place you are forced to have vassals, colonial nations, while colonies in EU4 are insanely loyal. You can reduce Spain to the Balearic Islands, and colonies like Brazil and the Americas will take from 0% liberty desire to 2% liberty desire. Now, is there internal country management within EU4? Of course, actually quite a few mechanics around that involving but not limited to military revolts. But the difficulty in revolts and internal stability is not usually due to the military strength of the rebels, but the micro necessary to deal with them properly. The rebels' best bet is to basically human wave offensive you until you're out of manpower to deal with them, at which point they can maybe squeeze in an enforce or two before you inevitably win. This is not to say that revolts are underpowered. If anything, it's not unusual to see provinces have revolt stacks that number way more troops than the local population does in the modern day. But EU4 scaling is also whack, meaning you frequently end up in situations where, again, the difficulty isn't from the fight being challenging, the difficulty comes from the grind of having to put down the Congo Independence Revolt for the 176th time. In many ways, EU4 is a game with collapse mechanics which ironically enough are quite well developed, but at the same time, well, they are used to make the game more grindy instead of more difficult, or dare I say more fun, from a national management point of view. But can internal politics, through the mechanics of disasters, negative events and challenges, be actually fun in EU4? Well, I do believe so. There is a mod that makes EU4 internal country politics significantly more fun, and that is Anbennar. Now, Anbennar is both insanely popular and also not very popular with those that see fantasy, see elves and go, okay, I don't care, bye. But if you are in the second camp, stay with me for just a moment. Within Anbennar, as I frequently complain, there are a plethora of disasters that can affect your nation. As an example, there is a disaster for the Jad Empire called the Deodoran, I hope I pronounced that right, which literally gives you a full civil war, with half your country breaking free, and if you manage to win, you reintegrate your country for free as well. However, during said civil war, your enemy nation will actually build armies and fight you, as another nation. And what I also find interesting is that the frequent events within the Civil War itself include, but are not limited to, events about your troops defecting to the enemy, or enemy troops defecting to you. This is cool. It's very frustrating in the moment for sure, but as a game design point of view, it really makes the disaster that much more substantial and genuinely makes it feel more like a civil war with your troops switching sides. And there are plenty of disasters of this kind. Elintir gets multiple nation-based civil wars, the Center Horde literally collapse themselves into a Sengoku Jedi-styled government, and the dwarves are clearly inspired by the Dwarf Fortress game philosophy and the idea of fun being all disasters, yes. From the top of my head, if you start as a remnant dwarf, so not one of the walking around dwarves, but one of the people that start with a whole day 1, you get the Remnant Stagnation disaster, and later have access to the Goblin Tide disaster, Horde Curse disaster, Obsidian Invasion disaster, a Religious Reform disaster, and of course the Funny Farm Infection disaster. That's 6 disasters so far, and in fact there's a bunch of dwarves in the north of the Serpent Spine, one of the areas within Anbennar, and they're making ice metal, aka the Ice Dwarves, and they have their own unique disaster on top of that. And fun Lemon Cake lore fact, I actually, before I started doing YouTube with Modify Stacking, wanted to make a Disaster Dwarves run where I play as the Ice Dwarves and get all 7 disasters, but I decided to wait until the Dwarven Empire mission tree was added to Anbennar. Well, since making the decision to wait, I've created this YouTube channel, started and completed a university degree in mathematics, and saw an announcement of both EU5 and GTA 6. In fact, both Victoria 3 and Hollow Knight Silksong managed to come out and release before the Dwarven Empire mission tree dropped, which means needless to say I don't think I'll be doing that Disaster Dwarves run anytime soon. But this has already been a massive tangent, which exists just to say that EU4 has the tools necessary to make the collapse interesting and fun, and to provide actual challenge in the form of disasters to the player, which are both rewarding to overcome and can also lead to genuine nation collapse if you lose them. But okay, so EU4 is done, right? It's had its final update, it's time for EU5. Does EU5 solve these issues? Well, at the moment, no. It's less grindy compared to EU4, namely that you no longer get random 7k rebel stacks revolting against your 1 million man strong army, but while in theory every revolt in EU5 is more substantial because it involves a civil war, in practice actually managing those revolts is insanely doable, and in terms of stability of your country, well, unless you actively go out of your way to sadistically annoy your own population, you're not going to collapse. Again, in EU5, larger empires are inherently more stable, and in fact at the moment I would say it's so bad that out of all the Paradox titles, the only game where your nation is even more stable than EU5 is Crusader Kings 3. What annoys me, while giving me some hope as well, is that, at least within EU5, the mechanics for engaging country management do exist. They're just way too easy to use to achieve stability, and hence at the moment the stability of a nation from a revolt point of view is laughably trivial. Well, let's hope it's more of a challenge by release. So that all said, I do believe today that my main points have been made. I can repeat myself for games like Stellaris, Hearts of Iron 4, even Victoria 3, but this would be redundant in my opinion. But of course I still welcome your input, but unfortunately that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, Sleven, Lord Zendikar, Nick Huss, and Hatan, Sal72, The Awesome Rabbit, Best for Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Lebarule, W Haste, Sov, Anthony35, AC Napo, Conspiracy Pizza, Yukata, Dunray, Malvi, Jack, Ryland, Stuart Allen, Andrew Black, Nebula, Zentronic, and Toynet.